What's up, guys? It's a Casual King MMA, and today we're going to be exploring how the UFC lost the sauce. There is no better example of this and no better summary of the sport than the recent card we just had this week, Aaron Blanchfield, Macy Barber. Not only was it a horrible card on paper, not only did none of the fights deliver, we didn't even get a main event. Some people can view that as a good thing. We got to save 30 minutes of our time, but I didn't even tune in. I've watched every UFC event for the past 6 to 7 years, every fight on those events, and I skipped this card because I knew what it would do to me. I didn't even watch it. Now I'm frustrated because I'm seeing what the UFC is doing to this sport I love. This is a brand killer. Imagine it's your friend, you're trying to show your friend a fight, or someone just scrolling ESPN and they see, oh, UFC, I've heard of the brand, let me watch. And they tune into this. They will never watch another fight again. It is brand poison. The UFC have strove to build their brand. The biggest card of recent memory, UFC 300. There were big stars on there. You had Alex Bea headlining. You had multiple title fights. But it was the UFC brand, the culmination. The UFC promised that they would put on an amazing card. There were champions on the early prelims, and the fight card delivered. Because the UFC scheduled entertaining fights, they hyped the entertaining fights, and the entertaining fights deliver. UFC 300 is the UFC at its pinnacle. Just good fights on paper delivering. That is what it's about. And the UFC is built for years to get to the point where they could be this mainstream to put on a UFC event without the superstars, with stars, without superstars, and be able to be as culturally significant as it is. I mean, they did get lucky. Nah, Max Holloway did get the coolest KO ever, which helped elevate it. There's things like that happen. But the reason Max Holloway got that KO is because the UFC put a great fight between him and Gaethje on the card that was sure to deliver. Shocker, when you schedule good fights, you're more likely to get a good fight. That's just how it works. And when you schedule bad fights, when you schedule apex slop, you get bad fights. It's not rocket science. The apex is killing the UFC. Ironically, it helped start the wave that the UFC has been able to ride for a few years with COVID. The UFC was the first sport back, and at that point, apex cards were amazing. We got to watch Dustin Poirier and Dan Hooker go life or death in the apex, no crowd. It was like gladiators, hearing them up close, the shots, the knees, the elbows. Sickening, amazing, what the sport is all about. But the difference is, now the UFC treats the Apex as a backup. They have a certain amount of cards they need to put on per year. So what they do is, oh, we don't have a stronger card. We won't be able to sell an arena. Let's put on Apex slot. And that's why we got Aaron Blanchfield against Macy Barber. The UFC have a quota they need to hit. And to hit this quota, they put on crap like this. I'll get into a solution later, but this is an absolute brand killer. And the UFC, they could do better. Because the UFC's mentality recently has been quantity over quality. If we put on enough fights, some of them will be good. And that's the wrong way to think about it. Let's look at the Sphere card. Sugar Sean O'Malley against Marab. Flop. Shevchenko against Grasso. One of the second worst female title fight of all time. Second to only Rose against Carla Esparza. Okay? The card shouldn't have delivered. The two most important fights were horrible. But the card did deliver because the UFC was putting on a big event. The Sphere was amazing. The production was amazing. I love the ring girl outfits, not just dressed scantily. I like them actually fitting the vibe what the UFC is going for. And the UFC put on good fights on the main card. They put on Zell Huber, main card, striker versus striker, one of the best fights I've ever seen in my life. Because, shocker, as I said before, when you put good fights on paper, they usually turn out well. You put two strikers in a crowded arena at the Sphere, Mexican Independence Day, Zell Huber fighting for his Mexican pride, and we get one of the best fights of all time. It's not rocket science. This is what you do. You put the big fights on so people tune in, and you put entertaining fights below that so people are entertained, so they come back to the sport. That is how you market it. And the UFC knows how to do that. They've just gotten complacent. This is what the UFC feels like now sometimes, some Saturdays. And because the UFC have to put on a certain number of cards, this could be okay, but they can't be Saturday marquee events. It's embarrassing when the UFC isn't trending top 10 on Twitter, when nobody's watching a card, when everyone's just talking about basketball. It's embarrassing to put on a card then. You could do these Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday cards. 5-fight cards, what they do with Contender Series. It's 2 hours, it's quick, it allows your fighters to get the fights they need, it allows them to make money, and it gives them a chance to have some star-making performances and fights. And if the UFC want to do this, this is probably the best solution because we'll see. They probably won't be re-signing the deal with ESPN. Hopefully, the new carrier they have doesn't require a certain amount of events. But if they do require a certain amount of events, not everything needs to be a 6-hour Saturday event. You could put on these smaller events to make sure your fighters are fighting, to keep the fans entertained, and also to not embarrass your brand. Because fight night, there should be a level of quality for a fight night card. If you want to have a lower level of quality, make something different. Do something different. But you can't be putting bad fights on fight night cards. It's a brand ruiner. The other solution is, let's say they don't need as many fight cards in the next deal, cut fighters. Cut bad fighters, most importantly, cut boring fighters. Sorry, Bilal, you earned your title. You earned it. All respect, you won an amazing win streak, you deserved it. But you should not have been in that place. You have always been a not entertaining fighter, and when the UFC sees you're good and not entertaining, cut them before they get a shot at the belt. I've changed my view on Marab, but in the same way, would UFC rather have Marab be the champ or O'Malley? If you have one of these dominant wrestlers that's not that entertaining, Marab we should keep around, but just cut these guys. And the UFC used to have the right idea. They threatened to cut Colby even though he was ranked and he had to get a shtick. And his shtick saved his career and made him a lot more entertaining. You, it's an entertainment industry. If guys aren't entertaining, cut them. If this is the solution you want, you can do that. You already considered to have the best fights, the best fighters in the world. The UFC and the sport of MMA are the same thing. Whenever I talk to people about MMA, I have to say UFC. They think UFC is the sport. It is that big. It's that much of a monopoly. You can have less fighters. Keep the fighters that are entertaining around. If they're not entertaining, cut people. You can always bring them back later if they do well in the regional scene. The UFC have too many fighters and too many fights to fulfill. Either have more cards on random days to get these fights over, make them shorter, make them a less big event, to save the brand and also give the fighters a chance to show themselves, or have less fighters, less events to protect the brand. The UFC need to protect the brand. They need to protect the magic. The magic that the UFC has. When I tune into a UFC event, when I hear Bruce Buffer say it's time, I have been losing at. The UFC need to protect their secret recipe. They need the sauce. And if they have the sauce, they will continue to have success. If they lose that magic, that care, that pride in their product, they will continue going down this rabbit hole until they are no longer the UFC brand we came to know and love. Well, appreciate the rant, guys. Hope you enjoyed. If you disagreed, send something in the comments. Peace.